Coming up, we talk about the DotPad X, the brand new tactile multiline Braille display coming later this year.
You're listening to Double Tap, your daily accessible technology show. Now, here's your hosts, Stephen Scott and Sean Priest.
Hey guys, welcome along to another episode of Double Tap and a brand new week. Now, Sean Priest is getting another day off. Yes, another day off. I must be the nicest person in the world. I think that's what he said to me the weekend, although the phone's cracking up a bit, so who knows what he really said. But anyway, I can tell you he is doing better, and he will be back with us very, very soon. But today, I am not alone yet again. No, I am with someone who... I don't really know where to start with this man, quite frankly, because he's done everything. He's climbed mountains, he's run marathons, he's worked for major tech companies like Dolphin. He's just wrapped up a career at RNIB. He's off forging a new path ahead with the company Dot behind, of course, the infamous DotPad that we've been hearing a lot about and we want to hear more about today. Dave Williams joins me on the show, the very first time on Double Tap, I believe, Dave.
I think that's right. Yeah. Hello, everyone. Good to be here.
Yeah, good to have you here. And it is the first time. Now, it's interesting, actually. Someone said to me when I told them you were coming on, oh, well, hang on, Dave must have been on Double Tap. And I said, well, no, Dave was on with us on the old show, the old show after the older show that I did, which was Blind Guy Talks Tech. You came on very early on, and when we started that, and you supported us with that, which I was really grateful for. So, yeah, it was great to have you on that. And, of course, that's what led to this being daily. So I could just blame you.
Well, you could.
So how's it going? Because you've just left. Well, you've recently left RNIB, right?
I have, yeah. I finished at RNIB this April after 6 years. So I was working in inclusive design, so testing technology and doing some communication in the media quite a bit. Braille 200. I'm sure we'll talk more about Braille as we go through. But yeah, it came to an end in April, and as you mentioned there, I've moved on. Working a bit now with Dot, who are a Braille technology company from Seoul in South Korea, and doing a couple of other bits and pieces alongside. So, yeah, exciting times.
It is exciting. Now, look, when I left RNIB, there were rumours abound that I had been fired. I don't think people like me, Dave. I think that's the problem. So I'm guessing similar rumours are not the case for you, right? Because you left, as did I, by the way.
Yeah. I resigned on the 7th of April. My last day was, I think, like the last Friday in April. So yeah, I just felt like it had run its course a bit for me. You know, the organisation had changed slightly and was moving in new directions. And of course, I wish everybody at RNIB all the very best. Some fantastic people there, Stephen, as you know. And I'm never say never, right? I hope that the door is always open. I think we need a strong RNIB, but I felt it was time for me to focus more on Braille and technology. I've been chairing the Braillists Foundation, as you know, to spread Braille and tactile literacy in recent years. We've won a few awards for that even. And I just wanted to kind of go a bit deeper into that. And there was this fantastic opportunity to work with some other Braille technology companies and to just to be a bit more in control of my own destiny, as you did, Stephen.
Well, that's right. That's absolutely right. And I think, it's really, my leaving RNIB had really nothing to do with RNIB in and of itself. I wanted to do this as my main thing. And, I couldn't expect an organization like RNIB to pay me to do this all the time, to basically sit here and spout my opinions. I don't think that was really the appropriate use of RNIB money. So, it was quite right for me to decide to move along and do this. But, there's no doubt, and separately, or maybe not, I don't know, but, in regards to RNIB and what's going on there, there's a lot of change, in particular around Braille. And because you've listened to this show before, that we've had a lot of talk about Braille, from my point of view and all the rest, but certainly RNIB has had its feet held to the fire recently because of decisions it's made around Braille. Obviously, I'm out of RNIB now for 4 years. You were there at the period I left. I don't think our paths crossed much. I think they were very, just a slight overlap when you arrived and then I left. But it seems to me that RNIB has kind of lost its way when it comes to Braille. The whole story around personal transcription, what's going on there. I was very disappointed, and I think it's fair to say you were too, that the organisation decided to, just last minute, or what it felt like anyway, last minute decide to cut personal transcription. We had Connor Scott Gardner on here, of course, talking very eloquently about this and raising his concerns, many others too. RNIB did reverse that position, which is good, but really it's a stay of execution because ultimately there will be a review of this in a year's time. Where do you think RNIB is in regards to Braille? And does it reflect a wider issue, perhaps, among organizations, considering the amount of resources that are available? I mean, it's very hard to look at this as just an RNIB thing, right?
For a long time, I have felt quite strongly that Braille is undervalued, right? It's not the only tool. It's not the most important tool. There are lots of other things that we need as blind people when it comes to specialist skills. Clearly, Braille is one of those, right? It needs to be in the box with many other things. And there are many high-profile blind people that we can all think of that would cite Braille as being key in their success, right? And I'm not suggesting for a second that you can't be successful without Braille, but there does seem to be some kind of correlation. You know, Gary O'Donoghue, very high-profile BBC journalist, in the news again recently interviewing Donald Trump a year on from that assassination. Gary is somebody who would say that he could not do the job that he does as BBC's, North American correspondent. I probably got that title wrong, but the being on the news, and Stevie Wonder, who you and I have both interviewed, Stephen. He again, somebody else would say he could not write and edit his songs without Braille, and he harbours an ambition to actually publish his music in Braille for blind musicians to study. And that list goes on, right? And that does not seem to be reflected in the way in which organisations support Braille. It's almost like Braille is a last resort. And for me, I often trot out, my personal stories about reading the bedtime story and proposing to my wife on a Braille Scrabble board, and of course Braille on the marathon medals, which I really love. And so Braille is hugely important. It's just reading for your fingers, like print is for your eyes, like audio is for your ears, right? And it's just another way to read. So we need to demystify it and take away this idea that it's somehow some kind of secret code. It's not. It's just a pattern of dots that represents all the letters of the alphabet, numbers, punctuation, and so on. In terms of RNIB, look, I was very honoured to have the opportunity to lead on the Braille 200 celebrations. We are 200 years since the invention of the Braille code, and a year ago we kicked off those celebrations with events at libraries around the country. I hosted a panel discussion at the British Library with Lord Blunkett and a number of others who all, spoke very eloquently, much better than I could, Stephen, about how Braille has meant that they were able to succeed in education, employment, and in their independence. So, we hear this time and time again about how important Braille is, and Braille needs investment. And of course, when the announcement came from RNIB about the personal transcription service becoming a paid-for service, I was heartbroken. I read a message from a mum whose daughter needed a book in Braille, and it was going to cost this mum, I think, £90 or something like that, and I couldn't really believe it, because my understanding is that the model is that RNIB sells commercial Braille transcription, and that subsidizes the cost of small-scale personal transcription. And so, yeah, obviously that was a contributing factor. But I think overall, RNIB is the reason we have Braille in this country. RNIB was established to improve the embossed literature for the blind, I think was the initial mission statement. And so for me, RNIB fundamentally is a literacy organisation. It's about education, and RNIB's role in those early days was to evaluate the different tactile reading systems that were around, and there were many. There were as many as 20 different tactile reading systems in the 1800s, and it turned out that Braille was the one that blind people preferred. And so it was that RNIB backed Braille, produced Braille equipment, operated a Braille library, and has continued to invest in Braille, Braille standards, Braille technology. So RNIB's contribution overall when it comes to Braille cannot be underestimated. And I think RNIB themselves have said that, look, the way the personal transcription thing was handled was a misstep. And I think we've had an acknowledgement of that. What happens going forward, who knows? But if you don't use it, you'll lose it. So
that's for sure.
My recommendation is, if you want Braille from RNIB, make sure that you keep asking for it.
Yeah, I mean, look, you and I have a unique viewpoint here on this together because we've both worked for the organization. And, one thing I say a lot, and I try to say it a lot more, because people, as you well know, look, you've hosted my old show, Tech Talk. You've been on air before. You've done work on BBC. You know that there are times listeners don't always hear what you say. They hear the bits that they perhaps don't like that you say, but they don't hear the whole thing. And I've had to defend a lot of things I say. And there's a lot of things I say I could easily get hung for, but ultimately for me, RNIB was an organization that had amazing people working there throughout the organization. And I think that's the important bit people need to understand. Amazing people across every part of that organization working hard, damn hard, to do a great job for blind people. The issue for me always was leadership and not blind leadership being in charge. That was a big issue for me. A huge issue for me. And that's not unique to RNIB. In fact, I would say it's a UK charity issue.
It's global. I think it's global, Stephen.
Well, I think it is probably global. I mean, I would say that America's probably one of the few that stands out a little bit because of the NFB. And that to me has been, you've been to the convention, so have I. They're incredible. They just stand up and shout, we're blind people, and we're going to stand up and we're going to defend our rights and we're going to fight for our rights. And it's hard not to be inspired by that.
It is inspiring when you go to those big US consumer conventions. I always feel replenished, and it is exciting. There is a real sense of there being a movement there, of blind people speaking for ourselves, advocating for ourselves, setting the agenda ourselves. And I am uplifted by that, and I am encouraged by that. Not everything they do is perfect, of course not, but that issue around leadership and blind people perhaps not being as involved as we should be in the leadership of the organizations that exist to serve us is a huge problem. RNIB talk about, well, we've got some trustees that have lived experience. But, let's be clear, when we talk about lived experience, we are talking about living with yourself a long-term, irreversible blindness or low vision, right? We're not talking about, somebody, or you happen to bump into somebody in the pub who was blind. Just because I live with a woman, it doesn't mean that I know what it's like to be a woman, right? And so when we 100%. Talk about lived experience, we are talking about every day, all day, and the way other people kind of treat you, maybe underestimate you, and perhaps have low expectations sometimes, or how sometimes people will hold you up as some sort of heroic figure, right? I mean, I've run a few marathons. That's no secret, right? And I'm a fairly ordinary runner. I'm not especially quick. I'm not especially slow, right? And there are people who've run many more marathons than I ever will. There's a lady, Louise Simpson. I think she's done over 120 something, but she doesn't think of herself as a hero or anything like that. She's just found something that she loves doing, right?
She loves it, yeah.
Yeah, right. And so I think that's what blind people are trying to get to is a world where we sort of normalize it a little bit, that actually, yeah, okay, it's a difference. We acknowledge that difference, but actually we can still be very active contributors in our, communities. And if a blind person does something exceptional, it's exceptional because a person did it, not necessarily because a blind person did it, And so I hear you, and I think there's a lot of work needed to try and a lot more actually. I didn't receive a lot in the way of professional development at RNIB during my time there, and it was a source of frustration to me that the best blind people kind of disappeared off into other roles, and so there were very few blind people at senior level who really, walk the walk. And I hope that we can perhaps get back to, an RNIB that is more about us.
Well, look, we chatted yesterday before we did this. And if you don't mind me saying, that you made a point at that time about mentorship and the importance of having mentors. And actually, it was something I hadn't considered. I had often thought about the value looking out essentially from that CEO position or that, that director position. But you're absolutely right. From the point of view of someone who's blind getting into the organization, looking at a blind CEO and saying, that could be me one day. That's really important. That's hugely important. And we wouldn't think about this if we were talking about an organization for women's rights or an organization fighting to defend civil rights for black people in America, let's say. You wouldn't be having a conversation about who should be leading that organization. And if it was someone who wasn't a black person or a man leading a women's organization, it'd be headline news if that was the case.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, and it's funny, we almost tiptoe around this issue sometimes as blind people. I know some people don't, but, I think some people tend to tiptoe around it like, I don't want to cause offense by saying this because I don't want to make it sound like I'm upsetting someone. I don't care if I'm upsetting you by saying this because it's not offensive to suggest that blind people should run organizations for blind people. In fact, I think it's offensive to say the opposite.
Yeah. And, a small example of that, if you want directions of how to get from A to B, do you not find that if you get those directions from another blind person, you actually get the details that you need and the information that you really need because they know the things that you are going to be paying attention to? Whereas if you just ask kind of Joe Public, they'll say, oh, go down there and turn at the lights, like, oh, hang on, where should we start with that? So, so sometimes it's another blind person that can actually give you the tips and the tools and the techniques that you need. And I think that's also true when it comes to leadership, right? How do you function as I chair the Braillists organization. We have 7 trustees, all of whom are touch readers, and pretty much all our volunteers, bar a couple, I think, are all blind people, and we do punch above our weight. I directed ACB radio, and we genuinely were putting on the programs that blind people wanted to make, and there wasn't somebody else in the kind of background sort of setting an agenda, and we have to have that agency, and I think possibly in the UK, because we've had these big sort of monolithic charities, often led by sighted people, that we've become used to leaning on them when things are difficult, like, oh, if you need help with something, that's who you call, right? And they'll sort you out. And what we really need are the skills and the tools and the information and that kind of resilience and the attitudes to enable us to thrive in our own lives, right? Without having to rely on big charity or the state. And it's hard, right? I don't claim to have all the solutions at all, right? What do I know?
Well, I think there's one aspect that's missing hugely, and it was interesting because we chatted last week with Michael Babcock. He just wrapped up at the ACB convention. You were there as well, and I want to talk to you about that and your talk there. But he was talking about the community aspect of ACB, the American Council of the Blind, and how they really fostered community. And I was jealous listening to all the things, all the different hundreds of webinars and Zoom events, and because obviously you can't do these things in person, not entirely because of the breadth of the states. You can't bring everyone together all the time. That's what the convention is for. But being able to meet up and talk about the issues, the things, the subjects that matter. They said they did a course recently on electrical wiring for your plugs. And it's like if you said that to, to an organization like, and I say like RNIB because I've spoken to a few organizations about these kind of topics in the past, and they're like, oh, don't talk about that. That's terrible. You can't have a blind person wiring a plug. Why not?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's the point. Okay, I'm not saying everyone should do it. I'm not saying I would do it.
Well, you probably don't need to as much these days, right? But
no,
I take the example, change a light bulb or whatever it is, right? I know my wife teaches independent living skills at a specialist school, and they are few and far between now. But she had the facilities team build her a little kind of board where kids could practice putting in light bulbs and learning about basic kind of DIY tasks. And I do wonder how much of that kids in inclusive mainstream settings will get access to these days. And I remember 20 years ago when I was directing ACB Radio, one of the shows we had was Blind Handyman. And I remember, one of the episodes was about installing a waste disposal unit, and they had to make a hole in the wall, and there was plumbing involved. And I mean, I would be useless. I don't know about you, Steve, but I'm hopeless. I can't even cook. I burn a salad, So you don't want to let me loose with a power tool, right? But people can do this stuff, right? And of course, famously, NFB teach people to use chainsaws and stuff like that. And I think it's about choice, right? I'm not saying that blind people should or must do any of those things, but at least have the opportunity, right? If that's something that interests you or something that you want to do. I like getting out and participating in running or going up hills or whatever it is, right? I know that in my band, I'm in a blues band, and they used to worry, like in the early days, about me falling off the stage or tripping over amps or cables and things like that. Now they're fine, like they used to me, because I've sort of said, look, I live in a house where people leave stuff on the floor all the time. I'm a dad, and of course, anyone who's a parent knows there's always stuff to fall over. So, like, it's fine, but other people, they fear for you, Stephen. They worry about you. I think Chris McCausland talked about this. He'd do all that dancing, on the TV, and he'd have, Diane in the air above his head, but then people are getting a flap about him walking down the steps of the taxi, So, yeah.
It always amazes me how people think you managed to get somewhere. It's like how they can't understand how you can walk down a flight of steps, but they don't consider the fact that you managed to get to that particular restaurant, let's say. How did you get there? How did you manage that? It's not that you were dropped there by aliens. I mean, you had to get there somehow, and you had to get up and get dressed and do things. And it just seems like an endless parade of, wow, that's amazing. Like, I imagine you saying, well,
no
kids...
No one's trying to be patronising, right?
No,
I think
they're
coming
not,
from a
it's
good
just
place,
surprise,
right?
Isn't it? It's just like...
coming from a good place, right? They mean well, but unfortunately, just culturally, the way we are portrayed and perceived in society is... some level of kind of helpless, right? And so that informs that perspective. And so it doesn't occur to somebody that actually you might want to use the stairs. I remember going to the Colosseum and being ushered into a lift. And I wanted to go up the steps because I wanted to get a sense of the size of it, and the scale of it and stuff like that. I didn't want to go in the blinking lift. So I think sometimes people are looking for the path of least resistance. You've got some of that going on. You've also got, I've delivered training for transport providers, and I've had it where somebody will be saying, well, what happens if I'm with a blind customer who is late for their train, right? And they want to get on the train, but we can't hold the train because we're going to get fined because then the train will be delayed. And my question is, well, you've got to ask them, are they able to go a bit quicker? If they want to get it, not to feel under pressure, but if they say to you, can we go a bit quicker or can we run or whatever, then, we're adults at the end of the day. And I think sometimes we are treated like children when it comes
That's the root of it, I think. That's the root of it. We're infantilized. Infantilization is a huge problem. Like if a blind person swears, it can throw you off. It's, I remember an old joke by the Scottish comedian Billy Connolly who said, they don't allow my audio on planes, because if you say the F word at 35,000 feet, the plane might fall out the air, apparently. And of course it's nonsense, right? It's absolute nonsense. But, this is the issue we have, is that we are treated like children. And I get it to some degree, and I always try to be mindful when something happens like that, to either use it if I'm in the mood for it, to use it as an opportunity to educate.
Yeah,
but
and I think we all do on a good day. On a good day,
yeah,
right? We all do.
But sometimes it feels like it lacks, because then you feel sometimes you say it, and there's like almost the sound of disbelief that comes from you, as if to say, yeah, he says he does all these things. Does he really? I get that.
Well,
and I don't know if that's sometimes internal
sarcastic.
or...
Do you know... So if somebody says to me, I get off a train or something, right, and somebody says, I'll show you where the lift is, and they're being very kind, right, and maybe I want to use the stairs, maybe I've not had much exercise that day, and I always have this internal struggle with myself, because I always think, should I tell them about the marathons, or they think I'm being sarcastic? If I say, well, I ran a marathon last week or whatever,
Did you? Yeah. Really?
Yeah, wow. Right, Dave. Yeah, sit down.
Uh-huh. So you did. Yeah. Here's your coffee. Go away.
Yeah.
I know it's so difficult. It really is. But look, I mean, this is the reality of being blind, right? We have these, and look, and how many women face different but similar challenges, in the sense that they are challenged, but in lots of different ways, capabilities and all that. I think when you break it down, because I think there's a danger of putting ourselves in a box, and then that box becomes our tomb, essentially. We can't get out of it. And we kind of get wrapped up in this idea that we're the only people in the world who face these issues. Yeah. And of course, that's not true. Everyone faces issues every moment of the day.
Different ones, you see, the challenge is, Stephen, because we are a low incidence disability, I think society tries to think, well, okay, blind people need X, Y, and Z, right? And they want a little kind of to-do list of, here's your top tips for, how to guide a blind person, or, we've all delivered those courses, right? Or how to make information accessible for a blind person, right? And to try and sort of distill it into a set of bullet points or a PowerPoint slide. But the challenges are different, right? Even two blind people who have the same eye condition, right? They're going to have different mentalities. They're going to have different experiences. They're not necessarily going to approach problems in the same way. They're going to have different skills and attitudes and so on. And I know we always sort of trot out this line of, we're all different, you need to communicate, you need to listen. But it's absolutely true. You do, because otherwise you're going to pigeonhole people, and you can't put everybody in the same, what works for you, Stephen, doesn't necessarily work for me.
Yeah, and this is something I say a lot. I really shout about this whole individual opinion, or individual, thinking, individual thought, which is really important to me, because I feel sometimes in the blind community, if I'm being brutally honest, I feel that there's an opinion that's kind of set by, I remember when I was growing up, we used to talk about the blind mafia. There was a group of people who decided what we're going to talk about, decided how we were going to live our lives, and that was what we all just followed, like sheep. And, I kind of hope that's going away, although I'm not sure if it is. And that's sometimes down to individuals. And again, there are people like that in every walk of life. There are people who will just follow the curve. I was amazed when the lockdowns happened, when COVID-19 came along and we were locked down. I said to my wife, we better prepare for looting and chaos and nightmares. And then everyone just stayed in the house. And I'm like, what? People listened? It blew my mind, right? It's like people just followed it, and I don't know if they do it again, mind you. But, it's like, it just amazes me sometimes how people just fall in line with things. And I'm very keen on individual thought. I tend to promote it. I'm not saying, we should, create conspiracy theories out of everything. I don't believe that either. But I think, ultimately, we should be able to think for ourselves, and that's really important. But we should also be able to speak for ourselves and speak about ourselves. I often say this: when you hear the view of one blind person, you've heard the view of one blind person.
Yeah. Well, and we're lucky, Stephen. We're very lucky, because we've got a little bit of a voice. We know how to make a podcast or whatever, or get on the radio or the TV.
Some would argue, Dave.
I know some would say we shouldn't, right? And every time somebody says they've seen me on the TV, I go, "Oh, well, my advice is get rid of your television." Sorry about that. Yeah, perfect face for radio and all of that. Yep. But my mate Martin, he's got a phrase he uses. He talks about the super blind, right? And it is blind people who've kind of got a job and are independent and can speak up for themselves. And that's one version, right, of blindness, right? Because there are a vast majority of blind people out there, right, who will never make a podcast. They're never going to be necessarily in the media, or they might struggle to get into employment. And we know those statistics, right? 3/4 of working age blind people unemployed. So we've got to remember, that we're in a little bit of an echo chamber sometimes when we talk about this stuff, because it's, people like us a little bit, but actually the vast majority of blind people are really not like us. They're living very different lives.
No, 100%. Well, look, stay right there. I want to talk to you about Braille and some other bits and bobs as well. So we'll take a short break. We'll come right back. But first, here's how to get in touch with the show.
Get in touch with Double Tap. Email feedback@doubletaponair.com. Leave us a voicemail at 1-877-803-4567. And now you can send an audio or video message to us on WhatsApp. That number is 1-613-481-0144.
Talking today with Dave Williams, who's working now with Dot. Going to talk more about that in a minute, I promise, because I know lots of you are interested in the Dot Pad and a new product that's coming out later this year. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But I want to say, because a lot of people will know you, Dave, a lot of people might not, listening to the show, and either way, I want them to know how decent and nice a person you are. And I'm going to tell you why. No check here, because look, I want to say this, and you might be, I'll save your blushes for this one, but when you decided to take on the Tech Talk show, you approached RNIB, and you were at RNIB, I believe, at the time, and I don't know if they asked you or you asked them, but ultimately a decision was made that they asked you, and RNIB wanted to continue doing the show that I was doing at RNIB at that time, and they wanted to continue Tech Talk, and you very kindly, and absolutely did not need to, but you called me and you said, listen, I'm taking on this show. How do you feel about that? And I was honestly touched by that. And it sticks with me to this day, and will do for a long time, that you did that. And I thought, what an act of kindness. You didn't have to do it. There was if I'd have said no, you'd have said, well, tough, I'm doing it anyway. But the fact is that you did come to me and you asked that question, and I thought it was just so kind and so considerate and really respectful of what we had built over all those years. And I really wanted to thank you for that. And I want people to know that's the kind of guy Dave Williams is.
Well, that's very kind, Stephen. And I have to really thank probably Jonathan Mosen, because 22 years ago or something, he came to me and said, look, I'm leaving ACB Radio, and I really think you would be the right person to take it forward. And he believed in me, and we had a long chat about it, and I interviewed, and I did it for a trial period, and I took it on, and I knew he was going to be an impossible act for anyone to follow as director of this internet radio service that really was the first of its kind, was crossing continents, bringing blind people together long before Zoom and virtual conferences and all that stuff became the norm, right? And so I understood, obviously, when RNIB invited me to come and host Tech Talk, that this had been your baby, right? For 400 odd episodes, you had been there. You were Mr. Tech Talk as far as I was concerned. And so I just thought it was worth 5 or 10 minutes of our time to have a bit of a chat to make sure that, were there to be any kind of transition or handover or whatever, that we did that in as sort of amicable and smooth a way as we possibly could, right? Because I didn't know at the time all the circumstances around your departure. They'd given it a break for 6 months while they try and figure out what they were going to do with it. And then I was invited to do it. And I was like, well, I will do it. But just so you know, I'm going to call Stephen just because, I want him to know that you've asked me, and that if he has anything specific in terms of what he wants to say on the subject, I'd like to hear it at first hand. And that was why I called. And so I appreciate what you're saying, but also there was a little bit of kind of, self-preservation. I mean, I didn't want to screw it up, as well.
And you didn't. You absolutely did not.
Well,
and
we
you
did
wouldn't have anyway.
150 episodes. We did 150
Yeah,
episodes. Not many as you, but did a few.
Well, it's not about the number. It's about the quality. And, the fact is you kept the show going, or you brought the show back, I should really say. And, you gave it a new life. And I think it was the right looking back on it, if I'm honest, I think it was your approach was the right approach for that show. Because we had taken it, Sean and I, on a very weird and wonderful journey. And we know people enjoyed it, and we know people listened to it, and we know that was the case. But I think it needed to be the voice of RNIB. And it perhaps wasn't by the end when I was doing it. And it needed to get to that. It needed to get back to that. And also, we can't all do the same thing. Wouldn't work, right? But no point you trying to come along and, you know, and all that nonsense, you know, whatever silly sound effects we had going on at the time, you know. So there was no point doing that. And I think you brought a gravitas to it, and it was a great show. It was a great listen. It was very enjoyable. And I saw a lot of people who commented online. I think some are quite pleased to see the back of me on it and say, you know what, this is finally the show we wanted. So yeah, well done. It was a great effort. And the show continues today under the stewardship of Callum Stoneman, who was your co-host.
Yeah, he was. And, you know, we developed Callum and Hubert over the years. And I was very lucky to have a team. And it was only part of my role, right? So you worked in the Connect Radio team. I wasn't in that team. I would, you know, sort of turn up one morning a week, basically, and we would do Tech Talk. And I loved doing it, but at the same time, I was working on inclusive design. I was working with people like Sony and Netflix to advance their accessibility initiatives. We managed to get, Microsoft to come on the show. And so I saw it as a bit of a bridge, really, because I think sometimes there is a sense within RNIB, people might not realize this, that sometimes Connect Radio is a bit kind of out on a limb a little bit. It's almost like this kind of offshore thing. And so it was an opportunity to build a bridge, I think, between Connect Radio and the rest of RNIB with the technology, and try and bring the Technology for Life team, as it was back then, get them more involved, the inclusive design team, have them on there, you know, talking about audio description. I mean, it was quite funny because somebody said to me, "Oh, you've turned Tech Talk into main menu," you know.
Which was a great show, of course, and you piloted that at ACB, right?
Well, again, you know, it was something I inherited from Jonathan, right? And I just couldn't take the pace, right? He was doing 2 hours a week of technology, really high quality, and so I knew if I wanted to try and keep the quality going, I just needed to reduce the quantity. So I took it down to an hour for a while. I think it went back up to 2 hours, but. Yeah, for me, it was let's try and get a bit of something for everybody. Let's try and get high tech, low tech, but also that sort of, you know, Darren in Devon talking about his, I don't know, digital watch, and then, you know, Jenny Leigh Fleury from Microsoft, you know, and I like that sort of contrast of keeping it real with, you know, end users talking about their tips or challenges or whatever they were doing or problem they'd solved or something they wanted to share or explore. But then also, you know, those kind of high profile people talking about how they're trying to shape the world of accessible and inclusive technology. So it was brilliant, and I miss it. You know, I do. There were a great bunch of people, and Hal Davies, who was our producer on Tech Talk as well. Very lucky, and you know, I'm glad I remember they said to me right at the beginning, do you want to play music? I'm like, no. Why would I want to do that? You know, I said, but I would like a bit of help because I don't want to be doing this completely on my own, right? I think sometimes having somebody else listen back and give you, you know, critique your stuff, keep you honest. I think having that growth kind of mindset, always looking to improve, that was where I was, right? Because I know what I'm good at and what I'm not good at, and so you've got to bring people in to help you, right? Nobody's an island completely.
And you're right about missing it. I mean, they were a great team. I worked in Glasgow alongside a lot of people. I think some have moved on, but I worked along with amazing people, and Yvonne and Chris and the team who led the radio. Well, Yvonne and Chris who led the radio station. You know, I loved working with them, and I loved working with Alan and many, many others who were there over the years. And I was at RNIB for 15 years in that radio station. And, you know, a lot's changed since then, and it's been a long time since I've been away. But it's just great to hear it moving along and going from strength to strength. And it does feel like it's getting a bit more focus from RNIB, because you're absolutely right. There was a time where it felt, when I was there, that, RNIB just kind of left us alone, which in some ways was a good thing. This is kind of what I think let me feel a bit more loose about what I was doing, because I could just, do my thing. And, I had an amazing team behind me who were prepared to let me just get on with it. And it was great. But, again, like you, it wasn't my full-time gig. People didn't realize this. Tech Talk was the same thing. It was actually a very small part of my everyday. So, it was hard to give the focus to it. And I realized that was the bit I wanted to do all the time. And that's kind of where Double Tap was born. But yeah, it's such a... We're going through all our old memories now. I'm crying in a minute.
And, people start asking me, Stephen, where can I hear you now? Where can I hear you now? Because I've been at a few conferences this summer, Sight City and Tactile Reading and the American Council of the Blind. And people's like, well, but you're not on Tech Talk anymore, so where do we listen to you now? I'm like, really? You're not had enough? Like, after how many years of whatever? So... I can share with you, Stephen, I am starting a new podcast for our friends at Dot, but it's about Braille and tactile reading generally. And so, my tagline is putting you in touch with the people, the information, and the technology that is transforming and reshaping the world of Braille and tactile literacy. And so the podcast is called Raising the Dots. The first episode is already out, and there'll be another one pretty soon. So it's going to be a monthly. And there's obviously going to be a lot of Dot on there because they're paying for it. But obviously, I want it to be much broader than that, right? It's got to reach out and address this topic that we talked about earlier about, investing in Braille and tactile reading skills.
Well, who better to lead it than you, quite frankly? That is fantastic. Yeah, that's good. That's a new one for me to subscribe to. Thank you for that.
There you go. Raising the Dots. Well, yeah, it's going to be quite short, and it's going to be a monthly. And so hopefully people will be able to find, half an hour in their month when they'd be willing. And if you put it on double time, there you go. You could be doing 15 minutes.
You've done it 15 minutes, yeah.
There you
Fantastic. And listen, of course, you're always welcome here. Please know that. You're always welcome here to geek out. If you want to get away from the Braille for a minute and just come and geek out on something else, you're more than welcome.
Well, I will. Always.
Please do.
Yeah.
But I want to talk about Dot, because, or Dot Pad in particular. Now, I had the fortune, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago now, to test out the Dot Pad, which was very interesting. First time I ever really knew what the icons really looked like on my iPhone, because it drew them on the device. It was very interesting to learn about. What's going on with Dot? What's going on with Dot Pad, and what have you got coming? What's the story?
Okay, so Dot Pad is a Braille and tactile graphics display. I've actually got one in my hand here.
Oh, nice.
So it's about the size of an iPad Pro, I guess, and it weighs about 1.2 kilograms. So it'll very easily go in a backpack or in a school bag. And the idea with Dot Pad is it's a tactile display that connects to your smart device. So you Bluetooth it to your phone or your tablet, or you could USB it to your laptop, and it's going to work with your existing screen readers. So VoiceOver, NVDA, JAWS will all work with Dot Pad. And you can read multiline Braille on here, or as you say, you can feel tactile graphics. So like right now, I've got the icon for the App Store on the screen, and on the display down here, we've got a 20-cell display that says App Store. So you've got a 300-cell tactile graphics display where the pins are equidistant for the accurate representation of images. And like you, Stephen, for the first time, I was able to feel like the heart emoji or heart icon, for the health app, or the telephone receiver that you get for the phone app, and that was just a bit of a revelation, right? Who knew, right? Mm-hmm. Or the other way you can use this is as a multi-line Braille display. So if I jump into the Kindle app, for example, I'm able to read more fluently because I get 8 lines of Braille on there. So this is something that for years and years and years, everybody's been talking about. Braille displays, we've only had single line displays, right? It's a bit like reading from a calculator. You don't really get a sense of the shape of a paragraph or tabulated content or anything like that. And so now you are able to read multiline Braille from your connected smart device. So, your iPad, your iPhone or whatever. But then, of course, there are opportunities in education when it comes to technical subjects, right? So if you're studying STEM subjects, you're able to feel a graph, a chart, a spreadsheet, mathematics, music, poetry, any content that relies on you being able to read multi-line. And even if you're somebody that perhaps you don't read Braille, but actually you've still got, a sense of touch, being able to feel a graph, feel the shape of a graph, and develop those tactile skills can sometimes be more immediate and more present and more informative than trying to process like a whole bunch of numbers being spoken out loud by your screen reader. So it's giving blind people, I think, another option when it comes to accessing information, a multi-line Braille and tactile graphics display. So that's what DotPad is. Now, the DotPad you will have seen, Stephen, the kind of previous incarnation was using the previous kind of generation of the pin technology. And so the new DotPad being launched in the summer of 2025, I think pre-orders from August, shipping in September, is the DotPad X. And the refresh rate, it's 10 times faster than the previous DotPad. So that's what the X kind of indicates. Well,
that's good, because it was a little bit slow at drawing the images. So that's good to hear.
Yeah, and you don't have to lift your hand off quite so much, right? I mean, if you press down on it really hard when it's refreshing, then the pins aren't strong enough to push your hand up. But the speed at which it refreshes means that you can pretty much keep your hands, around the display at all times, and you haven't got that thing of, you've got to take both hands away while it does its refresh, or you're going to get, ghost dots and things like that. So they've really matured the technology, I think. So a few of you may remember Dot Watch from a few years ago. This was the wearable 4-cell display that went on your wrist. That was the first kind of generation, and then we got the original DotPad. Now DotPad X, I think, is now the technology really starting to mature and to come of age. And Dot have also taken, I think, quite a bold decision in supplying a cell protector. So over the pins, you have this almost like a screen protector, right? Which, as we know, one of the biggest challenges with any refreshable Braille device is ingress of dust and dirt and moisture, right? Because whose hands are always immaculate, right? And which environment is always going to be sterile. So this makes the device very reliable, very robust. It's going to protect the pins and protect that for a long time. And if you need to replace that cell protector, then we supply a bunch of those in the box. So yeah, I've started working with Dot in May, helping with customer experience and communication, and feeding into the design process to really make sure that the voice of the customer is heard at Dot.
I mean, there's been a lot of talk about Monarch from APH and Humanware.
Yes,
and they've put a lot out there regarding that. I think more needs to come out about DotPad, to be honest, because first off, it's less expensive. There's a reason for that, I think, though, because Monarch is ultimately, I think, a computer, you would say, within itself, whereas this is a display, right? But I don't know. Personally, I might argue that this is a better option because you can connect it to more things. I was talking to someone about this the other day. We were chatting about the idea of like an all-in-one computer that had a Braille display built in. There's talk of like the Optima that's coming out from Orbit Research at some point down the line. And, part of me thinks it's a great idea, and part of me thinks it's also a really expensive solution. BT, not BT, but Blazy Technologies are bringing out the BT Braille at some point. There's a price tag on it of like $4,095. It's going to be out of the reach for most people. It might be for a lot of people cheaper to buy a laptop and a separate Braille display, right? So you think when you add it up, it probably would be kind of the same or equal, or because at least then if the laptop gets old, you can replace it. And it's cheaper to replace that component than the Braille display. So I wonder if this approach might be a smarter approach for more people, because the Monarch is very expensive, what, $18,000? And you can't just get past that price. You have to consider that, right? You can't just say, oh well, I'll buy it and see how it goes. You got to think, well, okay, hang on, is this going to be useful for me? The other question, though, and this comes out of this whole conversation with Monarch, is the software that it's going to be connecting to. So, I mean, Monarch is not standalone. You can connect it to devices as well, but you need the support built into JAWS, NVDA, VoiceOver. Where are you with that, with DotPad, for that multi-braille or multi-line braille capability?
Well, firstly, I think it's important to say that HumanWare and APH have done some awesome work, right, with Monarch. I mean, you can play chess on it, right? It's just
it's an amazing device. I mean, it's amazing.
It really is, and it is incredible. But it is kind of, I guess it's like you say, it's more like a computer, more like a Braille note in some ways. It has a lot of software on board. Right, which is fantastic. It means that you can use it standalone. However, the pin technology is from Dot. So as well as Dot producing DotPad as a multi-line Braille and tactile display, Dot also are the original equipment supplier for the pin technology that's inside the Monarch, and also inside a number of other devices that are coming onto the market. And Dot is also involved in kiosks as well. So in South Korea, I went in April, and they have these kiosks in the built environment to get directions, so you can choose your destination. Say you're in a building and you're looking for the disabled loo or something like that. The tactile display will show you a little map with arrows, pointing in the direction where you need to go, and you're able to fill that. So it's not just about DotPad. There's also other projects coming alongside. In terms of the screen reader support for multiline, I think VoiceOver have led the charge there. So if I go into an area where there is just text and no image, then I get multi-line Braille. If I go into my home screen or somewhere where there is an image, then VoiceOver will try and render that image on DotPad. And now, as far as I'm aware, they're the only screen reader really kind of been doing that for the last couple of years. So
now, you're testing my memory on this, but I think this came out around iOS 15.2.
Yeah.
That sticks in my mind for something. So I think I remember that because it was so unique that we got that functionality. Like the first time we actually heard about a Braille display specifically mentioned in the release notes of an iOS update.
Yeah, so you're right. So from about iOS 15, we had multi-line Braille support in VoiceOver. We've now in NVDA 2025.1, we've got some DotPad support in there, very initial support. And JAWS will have multi-line Braille support coming in September. So they're all going in the right direction. None of them are perfect. People always expect software to be perfect. It's made by people, and people are fallible, right? So hopefully it can only get better. And of course, where there are issues, everybody needs to report them as vigorously as you can. So if you're lucky enough to be in the position to have access to a multi, because let's make no mistake, right? Yes, you're right. DotPad is a lot more affordable than some of the other options out there, but it's still, for many people, a funded purchase, right? You would still need some sort of grant or allowance or something to help with the cost of that. There are not many people who are going to be buying multi-line Braille displays out their own, or any Braille display come to that, right? And so I think we need to find ways to continue to push that down. And I've been involved in a few projects over the years. I was involved a bit with the Orbit project, bringing that into the UK with RNIB. That was a long journey. And of course, the Orbit products continue to be available through a number of suppliers in the UK. And Dot have this incredible technology, Stephen. Historically, there are lots of boring technical reasons, but basically the limitation of the older technology, it didn't scale very well, right? So if you wanted to make a bigger display, the cost would just go up and up and up exponentially, and you couldn't do multiline very easily. And DOT's technology addresses both of those challenges, right? So you can pack in as many cells as you want, theoretically. I've seen demonstration units with 768 cells or whatever, and so theoretically you can make a display as big as you want, and also the production of the technology is scalable, and the more you make, the cheaper it becomes. So hopefully that's going to help in real terms bring down the cost of refreshable Braille in the future.
And that would affect the Monarch as well, right? And the Line is, again, could bring its price down. What is the price of the Dot at this point? What's the Dot Pad X coming in at, which is coming out later in the year?
Do you know, I hate myself for saying this because it's such a like politician's answer, but because I've been at shows in the US and in Europe and in the UK, I don't have a price list directly in front of me. So I would check, depending on where in the world you are listening or watching this, I would check with your dealer. But ballpark in the US, I think we're looking at around $6,000, right?
Okay.
So I would check with your supplier. Your mileage may vary depending on the cost of providing support locally and things like that. It's always a bit of a controversial thing, isn't it? Like, but
always.
Today's exchange rate's different from yesterday, and then why is that not reflected in the price? And that's
let's
the
not
same
even mention tariffs. Yeah, exactly.
Well, and then we've got tariffs to deal with as well, right? So,
Dave, I'd love to talk to you more. We're out of time for today, but I really, really appreciate you coming on. It's been great chatting with you, great catching up again, and let's do this again soon.
Thank you, Stephen. Appreciate all you do, and stay in touch.
Thanks, Dave. And that is it for today. Thank you so much for listening. Keep in touch in all the usual ways. We'll catch you on the next Double Tap.